Imagine going back in time to the early 1900s. The streets were not dominated by noisy engines or smoke in the air. On the contrary, in some cities in the United States, the most popular vehicles were not powered by gasoline. They were quiet, clean, and easy to drive. They were electric. Yes, you heard right. More than a century ago, electric cars were already circulating around, and with advantages that, for many, still seem futuristic today. But if that's true, why didn't they ever tell us? Why was this part of the story forgotten? Were the first electric cars really that good? Or is there something darker behind his disappearance? In this video, you will discover a shocking part of automotive history that has been buried for decades. We will reveal how electric cars appeared even before gasoline ones, and how, at a certain point, they simply disappeared. Let's show that maybe, just maybe, the old models were more efficient, more practical, and even more sustainable than the ones we have today. And we're not talking about unproven conspiracy theories. We're talking about real documents, newspapers from the time, historical records, and of course, cars that really existed. Cars that traveled more than 100 kilometers on a single charge in the 19th century. But something happened. A silent movement began to grow, and it was driven not by electricity, but by interests. The oil industry, major automakers, and even mass marketing played a crucial role in what came next. You will understand how a promising technology was left aside, erased from the collective memory, while another, more polluting and noisy, took its place. Get ready. What you're about to see could completely change your view of electric cars. It's not just about the past, but about the present and future. Because if the first models already did so much, why are we still fighting for decent autonomy, charging infrastructure, and affordable prices today? Have we really evolved? Or are we just rediscovering and paying expensive for something we already had for over 100 years? The truth, as you will see, may be more shocking than it seems. Long before we heard about Tesla or lithium batteries, electric cars were already a reality on the streets. And not just as isolated experiments or futuristic concepts, they were in fact one of the most common forms of transportation in the early 20th century. The story begins in the 19th century. In 1832, in Scotland, a man named Robert Anderson created what can be considered the first rudimentary electric vehicle. It was just another cart with an engine powered by primitive energy cells, but the seed had been planted. In the following years, several inventors around the world began to improve the idea. Electricity was becoming popular, and with it, a new form of mobility emerged. In the 1890s, electric vehicles began to take real shape. They were silent, did not produce smoke, and had a very important advantage. They were easy to drive. Unlike gasoline cars, which required physical strength to turn the ignition handle clutches, and gear changes, electric cars simply needed to be started with a simple button. This simplicity meant that the female audience at the time quickly adopted the new technology. In 1900, in New York City, approximately 38% of cars were powered by electricity. For comparison, only 22% were powered by gasoline, the rest by steam. At that time, electric cars were seen as a symbol of modernity, comfort, and innovation. Models like the Detroit Electric, launched in 1907, even offered 130 kilometers of autonomy on a single charge. Impressive even by today's standards. And it wasn't just that. Some luxury models came with analog displays that displayed battery charge, speed control, and even a timer to schedule recharges. There were even charging stations in some American and European cities. And, amazingly, some richer drivers recharged their cars directly from the socket at home, at night, while they slept. Exactly as we do today. But if electric cars were so promising, what happened? To understand, it is important to observe the context of the time. At the beginning of the 20th century, the world was going through an industrial revolution. Big cities were growing, the demand for mobility was increasing, and new inventions were emerging every year. In this scenario, gasoline cars began to advance. especially after the creation of a figure who would forever change. The history of the automotive industry. Henry Ford. In 1908, Ford launched the famous Model T, a cheap, durable, and mass-produced gasoline car. While a Detroit Electric cost the equivalent of more than $40,000 today, the Model T cost around $850. The price difference was brutal, and with the popularization of assembly lines, gasoline cars became accessible to the common population. Furthermore, charging infrastructure was still limited. Electrical networks in cities were not standardized, and in rural areas practically non-existent. Fossil fuel began to expand rapidly with the discovery of large oil reserves, and with that came increasingly numerous fueling stations. Even so, the electric ones resisted for some time. Edison even invested heavily in developing more efficient batteries, such as the nickel-iron battery, which was more durable than the lead-acid batteries used in most vehicles at the time. Edison firmly believed that the future was electric, and he was almost right. In 1914, Ford itself began a secret project in partnership with Edison to develop a low-cost electric car with lighter batteries and greater autonomy. The project was even announced in newspapers at the time as the car of the future, but mysteriously, it was never released. Rumors say that the project was abandoned after pressure from the oil industry and financial interest linked to the expansion of gasoline as the main source of energy. Other reports point to technical difficulties and lack of demand. What is known is that from the 1920s onwards, electric cars began to disappear from the streets and from the collective memory. Today, few people know that electric cars already dominated the market at the beginning of the automotive era, much less that they offered solutions that are only now being rediscovered, such as home charging, silent driving, low maintenance, and surprising autonomy. It's almost as if history has come full circle, as if we were returning to where we started, but paying more for something that already existed. In the next block, we will understand because and as this technology has been shelved for so long, and you will see that the disappearance of the first electric cars may not have been a simple coincidence, but the result of a power struggle that influenced the world for more than a century. During the early 20th century, electric cars dominated much of the streets of modern cities such as New York, London, and Paris. They were seen as the ideal choice: easy to drive, silent, clean, and in many cases even faster than steam cars. But in a matter of a few decades, they simply disappeared. How was something so promising erased from history so quickly? The answer lies not in a single factor, but in a coordinated, and, for some, suspicious, sequence of events that favored combustion cars. To understand this turn, we need to look at the interests that began to form during that period. The first big blow came from oil industry. Until then, oil was a growing commodity, but still without a massive market to justify its large-scale exploration. The popularization of gasoline cars would solve this problem, and the person who positioned himself to take advantage of this opportunity was John D. Rockefeller through Standard Oil. With heavy investments, the company began to expand fueling stations throughout the United States. Meanwhile, recharging an electric car still required a power point at home, something not all homes had. The second blow came from mass production line, led by Henry Ford. The Model T, launched in 1908, cost a fraction of the price of electric cars thanks to its industrial-scale manufacturing. The public naturally turned to the cheapest and most accessible option. In just 5 years, Model T production reached more than 200,000 units per year. On the other hand, electric cars, more expensive and manufactured by hand, began to lose space. But there are indications that the drop was not just an economic or technical consequence. In 1914, Ford and Thomas Edison announced that they were working together to develop a popular electric car. The idea was to create an affordable vehicle with batteries developed by Edison that could compete with gasoline models. The project was publicized in newspapers at the time as a milestone for the future of mobility. Expectations were high, but suddenly the project was canceled. And to this day, the reasons have never been fully clarified. Some historians believe that the cancellation was motivated by external pressures. Ford depended on suppliers and partners who were deeply connected to the petroleum and internal combustion industry. The adoption of a popular electric car could threaten an entire production chain that was already consolidated and extremely profitable. There are also reports of sabotage and mysterious delays in battery research, which would have frustrated the project's progress. Another important factor was the aggressive marketing promoted by gasoline car manufacturers. Over time, an image of the electric car was created as something outdated, weak, and inefficient. In advertisements at the time, it was common to see comparisons that ridiculed trams, showing them as slow or feminine, which in the sexist logic of the time was seen as a negative point. Meanwhile, gasoline cars were promoted as powerful, virile machines suitable for real men. This type of propaganda not only influenced public opinion, it shaped the collective imagination for decades. Even though electric cars at the time offered more than enough autonomy for urban travel, something around 100 to 130 kilometers per charge, similar to many current urban models, the perception that they were inferior spread as an absolute truth. Furthermore, with the advent of the electric starter in 1912, which replaced the crank in the ignition of gasoline cars, one of the greatest advantages of electric cars was neutralized. Now, starting a combustion car was as simple as pressing a button. This leveled the usability field and removed its main differentiator from electric vehicles. The First World War also played a crucial role. During the conflict, demand for oil soared. The nations involved invested heavily in the infrastructure for the extraction and distribution of petroleum derivatives. Gasoline has become strategic, both militarily and economically. This once and for all consolidated the dominance of combustion. Cars. By the time the war ended, the world had adapted to gasoline. Electric cars, in turn, were practically extinct. The factories that produced them closed or were absorbed by conglomerates focused on the production of combustion vehicles. The automotive industry chose a path, and that path was not electric. But the question that echoes to this day is, was this choice really free? Or was it the result of silent manipulation, orchestrated by corporate interests? There are documents, for example, that show how General Motors, together with Standard Oil and Firestone, bought and dismantled electric tram systems in dozens of American cities. The goal? Replace them with diesel-powered buses, manufactured by GM itself. This action became known as the electric tram scandal. And although it didn't directly involve electric cars, it shows how industrial interests were able to erase cleaner solutions in the name of profit. With cars, the disappearance followed a similar pattern. Market dominance, targeted advertising, and the lack of incentives for battery research contributed to electric cars becoming a footnote in the history of mobility. In the 1930s, there were very few electric models left in circulation. Those that still existed were used by few enthusiasts or by specific companies, such as urban delivery services. But for the general public, they had already completely disappeared. And perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this story is that none of this has been widely told. Most people grew up believing that the electric car was a recent invention, something that came about with Tesla, or at most, the first prototypes in the 90s. The real story was buried along with the vehicles that could have revolutionized the world, a century ahead of schedule. In the next block, we'll reveal what these old cars could really do. You will see that much of the technology that we consider modern already existed, and perhaps it was even better than what we have today. If today you hear that an electric car travels 300 kilometers on a charge and you think that's incredible, get ready. In the early 1900s, some electric vehicles were able to travel more than 130 kilometers with lead-acid batteries. And we're not talking about theory. We're talking about recorded data, real models and testimonials from users at the time. The big question is, how did a technology that worked so well disappear for almost a century? And more than that, could it be that In some aspects, the first electric cars were really better than the current ones. Let's get to the facts. In 1911, Baker Electric, one of the most respected manufacturers of electric cars, launched models that, according to press reports at the time, could run up to 130 kilometers on one charge. The vehicles used lead-acid batteries distributed in the lower part of the chassis, which also provided stability. They owned speed limiters, analog dials to indicate remaining charge, and, in some cases, a recharge system with timer, allowing the car to be plugged in at night and automatically turned off at the end of the charge. Yes, they had, in 1911, the equivalent of what we now call smart charging. The brand's most famous model, the Baker Electric Victoria, it was silent, comfortable, and had velvet seats, spring suspension, and even built-in luggage compartments. It was, in its own way, a luxury car. Her clientele included doctors, lawyers, businessmen, and, surprisingly, herself, First Lady of the United States, Clara Ford, wife of Henry Ford. Ironically, while her husband mass-produced gasoline cars, she drove an electric one on a daily basis. Another legendary model of the time was the Detroit Electric, produced between 1907 and 1939. It offered multiple autonomy options, depending on the number of batteries, with variations ranging from 80 to 130 kilowatt per charge. Some examples used batteries nickel-iron, developed by Thomas Edison, which lasted more than a decade without replacement, something unthinkable until today. These batteries had incredible characteristics. They didn't catch fire, they were resistant to overloads, and they worked well even at lower temperatures. Its only disadvantage was its weight. But since electric vehicles at the time didn't need to be fast, this wasn't a big problem. And it doesn't stop there. Some cars had residential charging systems that connected directly to the electrical grid using adapters installed in garages. The concept was the same as today. You parked your car at night, and in the morning it was fully charged. And that was more than 100 years ago. In terms of durability, electric vehicles required less maintenance than gasoline ones, as there was no ignition, gearbox, exhaust, or cooling system. And because torque was delivered instantly, they were extremely efficient in urban areas. Now stop and think. If, with rudimentary technology, without onboard computers and without advanced materials research, these companies managed to achieve this level of functionality, what prevented us from evolving further throughout the 20th century? The answer may lie precisely in the abandonment of technology. When electric cars stopped being manufactured on a large scale, research into batteries, motors, and energy efficiency also lost support. Interest in the development of automotive electrical systems waned, while billions of dollars were invested in combustion, petroleum, and derivatives. During the 1940s to 1980s, a few electric prototypes emerged, but they were all treated as curiosities, not serious solutions. Many of these projects were shelved, others were abandoned due to lack of funding. In some cases, there is evidence that certain patents were acquired by large automakers just to never be developed. In 1996, General Motors launched the EV1, a revolutionary electric car for its time. Light, aerodynamic, fast, and with up to 225 km of autonomy. It was a success among users who participated in the leasing program. But in a controversial move, GM recalled all the vehicles and destroyed, claiming economic unfeasibility. To this day, this case is cited as an emblematic example of how electrical innovations were deliberately set aside. Going back to the past, it is interesting to note that many solutions that are today sold as modern innovations were already present in trams at the beginning of the 20th century. Urban range above 100 km? It already existed. Nightly residential. Top-up? Also. Silent driving, without pollutant emissions. Gift, long battery life and low risk of combustion. Edison already advocated this in 1901. Of course, there are undeniable advances in current electric cars, lighter and more efficient engines, lithium-ion batteries with greater energy density, integration with intelligent systems, ultra-fast recharging, among others. But the point is, we are advancing on a basis that already existed, and which could be much more developed today if it had not been interrupted for almost a century. It's as if we were digging to rediscover technologies that were buried, not by the dust of time, but by political and economic interests and choices. Another important point is the environmental cost of this reinvention. If electric vehicles had remained in line since the 1920s, perhaps we would not have a global fleet of billions of combustion vehicles today emitting tons of greenhouse gases. Perhaps the planet was in another stage of preservation. So yes, much of what we today call the future was already a reality more than 100 years ago. What we lost in that time may never be completely recovered, but by revisiting these forgotten technologies, we open our eyes to a new way of looking at evolution. Innovating doesn't always mean creating from scratch. Sometimes innovating means having the courage to look back and rescue what was unfairly discarded. In the next block, we'll talk about how electric cars have had a strong resurgence in recent years, and why, even so, they still face challenges that had already been resolved a century ago. After almost a century of being forgotten, the electric car has returned to the scene. But when that happened, something curious happened. The narrative completely changed. Rather than being seen as a return to old, proven technology, the electric car was sold to the public as a modern revolution, an unprecedented innovation, something entirely new. And many believed. The image of the electric car was rebuilt based on the idea of the future, sustainability, and high technology. Digital screens, aerodynamic design, smartphone connectivity, artificial intelligence, and instant speed. It was the complete package to win over a new type of consumer. More aware, more connected, more demanding. But behind this new packaging, there is much more to the past than you might imagine. The big name responsible for this change of image was, without a doubt, Elon Musk. When a Tesla emerged, with its first model, the Roadster, in 2008, the world began to look at the electric car with different eyes. It was fast, beautiful, expensive, and electric, a symbol of status, luxury, and innovation. But what few people knew, and still few know today, is that much of what Tesla presented as new had already existed in electric cars for over 100 years. The average range of the first Tesla Roadster was around 320 km. Impressive, yes, but also a reflection of natural technological advancement after decades of battery research, mainly because of the electronics industry. Tesla's merit was to unite all these technologies into a desirable product. But the basis, the concept, the principle, all of this already existed at the beginning of the 20th century. And it wasn't just Tesla that took advantage of this technological renaissance. Practically all major automakers in the world have started to launch electric or hybrid lines. BMW, Nissan, Ford, Volkswagen, Mercedes, all started to announce, as if it were new, concepts such as zero emissions, recharge at home, braking energy regeneration, low mechanical maintenance. But if we go back to the 1910s, we see that these ideas, they are not new. The electric car has always been quiet, clean, and easy to maintain. What changed was the design, the onboard technology, and of course, the speech. Today, electric car marketing relies heavily on three pillars: sustainability, innovation, and exclusivity. And this speech has worked well, but it also raises a number of questions. For example, why did automakers take so long to invest in electric vehicles again? Why, even with all the advances in technology, are prices still so high? Why is the charging infrastructure in many countries still precarious? The answer may lie in priorities. For decades, the global auto industry has made trillions from fossil fuel-powered vehicles. Manufacturing, selling, supplying, repairing. Everything was part of a perfect machine of continuous profit. The electric car, on the other hand, break this cycle. It doesn't need engine oil, air filter change, exhaust system, or clutch. It simply has fewer moving parts and therefore gives less profit on maintenance. Furthermore, it requires a new energy infrastructure, charging stations, smart grids, large-scale clean energy, which is not always easy or cheap to implement. What's more, it requires a behavior change on the part of the consumer who needs to learn to live with autonomy anxiety, to schedule recharges, to plan trips more cautiously. It's not just a product change, it's a culture change. That's why the marketing of the new electric works so well. It turns a historic comeback into a futuristic leap. It creates the feeling that we are moving forward, evolving, conquering tomorrow, when in fact we are just resuming something we left behind, by decision or convenience. And interestingly, even with all the current technology, the challenges continue. Autonomy is still a concern for many drivers. The durability of batteries still raises questions. The disposal of used batteries raises environmental debates. And the price of entry, even with incentives in some countries, is still inaccessible to a large part of the population. In some aspects, modern electric cars are superior. Faster charging, more efficient engines, digital integration, and sporting performance. But at other points, progress was just a recovery of what already existed and was abandoned. It's as if we took a 100-year turn to return to the same place, only now calling it a revolution. The truth is that the electric car, it was never just a question of engineering. It has always been a matter of interest, economic, political, and now also environmental. Today, the world is experiencing a new energy race. Automakers are trying to reposition themselves. Countries discuss the end of combustion cars, and consumers, increasingly aware, are looking for cleaner alternatives. But we still face the same obstacles as before: power, lobbying, resistance to the new, or rather the old that has returned with new clothes. In the end, perhaps the electric car never stopped being the future. Maybe he was always the one forgotten past, masked by decades of fuel, smoke, and propaganda. And now that he's back, we need to ask the right question. Are we going to let him really evolve this time? Or will we repeat the mistakes of the last century? In the next, and final block, we will close this journey with a deep reflection on what we lost, what we rediscovered, and what we can still achieve. Throughout this video, we revisit a story that few know, and that perhaps has been purposely forgotten. We discovered that the first electric cars were not just rudimentary prototypes or museum curiosities. They were functional, efficient, and in many ways, already solved problems that we still face today. Decent autonomy, home charging, zero emissions, low noise, low maintenance, all of this already existed more than a century ago. So why was this technology buried? It wasn't due to inefficiency. It wasn't for lack of demand. And it certainly wasn't for lack of potential. The answer, as we have seen, lies in the gears of power. Economic interests, industrial alliances, and strategic decisions shaped what we would drive and what we would not drive for decades. And now, as we watch the triumphant return of electric cars, with marketing campaigns, selling them as the pinnacle of innovation, it's impossible not to feel a hint of irony, because the future we were promised was already the past we ignored. But that doesn't mean all is lost. We are, once again, faced with a choice. We can repeat the mistakes of before, stopping progress for financial interests, slowing down innovations for convenience, silencing sustainable solutions in the name of profit. Or we can learn from history and do things differently. Electric mobility does not need to be a luxury or an advertising piece. It can and should be accessible, reliable, and integrated into everyday life in a fair and intelligent way. This requires more than technology. It requires political will, environmental responsibility, and above all, memory. Because when we forget what has already been done, we run the risk of believing that everything is starting now, and paying again for something that was already ready way back when. The past is not just for remembering, it serves to alert us. Yesterday's electric cars show us that the world could have gone another way, a cleaner, quieter, more efficient path, but he was interrupted. Now, it's up to us to decide whether we're going to take it back, or whether we're going to let it disappear once again. And you, what do you think? Were the first electric cars better than today's? Or are we just repackaging what was forgotten? Comment below. Your opinion could make a difference in this debate. If you liked this video and want to see more hidden stories, historical curiosities, and reflections on technology and society, subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to like the video and to share with someone who thinks that electric cars are an invention of the 21st century. Sometimes, to understand the future, you have to dig into the past.